The Galactic Council had a name for every species that crawled, slithered, flew, or photosynthesized its way into sentience. 7,412 species cataloged and ranked. The Draconari sat near the top, scaled, winged, fire-blooded beings whose civilization predated most stars in the Orion Arm. They built cities inside volcanoes. They carved laws into obsidian with their claws. They measured wealth not in currency, but in the purity of their flame. And their princess was eating paper, not metaphorically, not as some ritual or cultural sacrament. Kael'thera von Drexus, third-born daughter of the Ember Throne, 97th in the unbroken line of the Ashen Crown, was tearing strips from a maintenance manual she had found wedged behind a ventilation panel aboard Relay Station Gamma 9, and chewing them into a paste that she swallowed with the careful, mechanical rhythm of someone who had been doing this for a long time. The manual tasted like dust and synthetic binding adhesive. The adhesive had a faintly sweet chemical note that her stomach could process and is something her body could almost mistake for nutrition. Almost. Her digestive system was built for mineral-dense meats, volcanic glass shards, and the calcium-rich bones of prey animals twice her size. Paper gave her maybe 2% of what she needed, enough to keep her organs from shutting down, not enough to keep her wings from losing their membrane tension, which they had 3 weeks ago, the translucent skin between the bone struts going slack and papery, ironic, given her diet, until they hung from her back like wet laundry. She did not think about her wings. She thought about the next page. The station was supposed to be abandoned. That was the entire point. When the Draconari political apparatus had decided that a third-born princess with the wrong opinions about territorial expansion was more useful as a disappearance than an execution. Executions raised questions, disappearances raised only rumors. And rumors could be shaped. They had chosen Relay Station Gamma 9 because nothing and no one came here. It sat at the dead intersection of 3 defunct trade routes in a sector so gravitationally boring that even automated freight drones skipped it. The station's only function had been to relay communication signals for a mining consortium that went bankrupt 40 years ago. Its power core ran on residual nuclear decay. It would keep the lights on and the air recycled for another century, long after Kael'thera's bones had become part of the station's dust ecosystem. She had been here for 11 months. The first 3 months, she had rationed the emergency food supplies in the station's single functioning storage bay. Military-grade nutrient blocks designed for a species she had never heard of, something called Velnari, apparently a fungal collective that absorbed nutrition through their skin. Kael'thera had tried absorbing the nutrient blocks through her scales. Nothing happened. She had tried eating them. They tasted like compressed sadness and gave her stomach cramps that lasted for days, but her body extracted something from them. Some mineral, some trace element. Enough. When the nutrient blocks ran out, she found the paper. Maintenance manuals, instruction booklets, warning labels peeled from equipment panels, old printed communication logs that someone had archived in physical form because digital storage on the station had failed decades ago. She ate them all. She developed preferences. The thicker manuals, printed on a cellulose composite with mineral fiber reinforcement, were better, more calcium, more silicate trace elements. The thin communication logs were barely worth the effort of chewing, but she ate them anyway because the alternative was not eating, and not eating meant dying, and dying meant her father won. Her father was not going to win. That was the only thought she held with any real temperature. Everything else, the loneliness, the degradation, the slow wasting of her body from something magnificent into something fragile and strange, she processed with the detached efficiency of someone disassembling an engine. Catalog the damage. Note the loss. Continue. But the thought of her father believing he had solved the problem of her, that thought she kept hot. Kael'thera had been a problem since birth. Draconari culture organized itself around flame purity. The color, intensity, and chemical signature of a dragon's fire determined their caste, their marriage prospects, their political value. The royal line breathed white flame. Pura plasma. The hottest fire a Draconari could produce. Kael'thera's flame had been white at birth, as expected. By adolescence, it had shifted. Blue threads appeared in the white, then green, then colors that had no Drakenari name because no Drakenari had ever produced them, iridescent, shifting, a flame that changed hue depending on her emotional state, that burned cold when she was angry and hot when she was calm, that did everything backward and wrong. The court scientists called it a mutation. The priest called it corruption. Her father called it nothing at all because he stopped speaking to her directly when she was 14, communicating only through intermediaries, as though her condition was contagious. Her sisters treated her with the specific cruelty of people who are afraid of catching something they do not understand. They excluded her from ceremonies. They whispered in hallways. They smiled at her with the precise warmth calibration of someone performing kindness for an audience while delivering contempt to the recipient. Kael'thira responded by becoming inconvenient. She studied the histories her tutors tried to skip, the ones about Drakenari expansion wars, the species they had displaced, the planets they had burned clean of indigenous life to make room for volcanic terraforming. She asked questions in court sessions that made advisors cough and change subjects. She published a paper, a real academic paper, submitted under a pseudonym to the University of the Ember Reaches, arguing that the Drakenari caste system, based on flame purity, had no biological basis, and was instead a social construct maintained through selective breeding programs that were, by any reasonable ethical framework, eugenics. The paper was well received in academic circles. Her father had the university's entire xenobiology department defunded within a week. Kael'thira published a follow-up paper from a different university. Her father had her quarters moved to the lowest level of the palace, near the waste reclamation systems. She published a third paper. This one named him directly. 4 days later, she woke up in a sealed transport pod with no navigation interface, no communication equipment, and a pre-programmed trajectory aimed at the deadest stretch of space the Drakenari cartographers could find. Relay Station Gamma 9. Her new kingdom. Population: 1 princess and approximately 11,000 pages of increasingly delicious maintenance literature. She was on page 6,412, a riveting section about coolant pipe specifications for the station's atmosphere processors, when the proximity alarm screamed. Kael'thira dropped the page. The alarm was not supposed to work. She had assumed it was dead along with most of the station's secondary systems. But it shrieked through the corridors with a sound like metal being tortured, and the vibration of it rattled her teeth and made her damaged wings shudder against her back. She stood. The motion cost her. 11 months of malnutrition had stripped her body down to something she barely recognized. The powerful musculature of her legs reduced to lean cables, her scales losing their luster, her tail dragging instead of hovering in the balanced counterweight position that Drakenari anatomy was designed for. She caught her reflection in a dead monitor screen and looked away. The alarm meant a ship. A ship meant either rescue or something worse. And, in Kael'thira's experience, the universe had a strong preference for worse. She moved through the station's corridors with the careful, energy-conserving gait she had developed over months of learning how to exist on almost nothing. Every step was calculated. No wasted motion. She had mapped the entire station in her first week, partly for survival, partly because mapping things gave her brain something to do besides eat itself. And she navigated to the docking bay by the most efficient route, which involved crawling through a maintenance shaft on level 3, because the main corridor on that level had a pressure seal failure that made the air taste like copper. The docking bay had a viewport. She pressed her face to it. The ship was small, absurdly small by Drakenari standards. Her people built vessels like flying cathedrals, all spires, and thermal vents, and dramatic silhouettes designed to make other species feel architecturally inadequate. This ship looked like someone had welded a box to an engine and then apologized to the box. It was gray. It had scorch marks that suggested either re-entry damage or a very bad day near star. One of its stabilizer fins was bent at an angle that no engineer would consider acceptable. It was the most beautiful thing she had seen in 11 months. The ship wobbled toward the docking port with the unsteady confidence of someone parallel parking for the first time while being watched. It overshot, corrected, overshot in the other direction. The docking clamps, which Kael'thara had not known still functioned, engaged with a grinding sound that resonated through the station's hull like a giant clearing its throat. Seal pressurization took 4 minutes. Kael'thara stood in the docking bay and tried to remember what she looked like. She was a Drakenari princess who had been eating paper for nearly a year. Her ceremonial tunic, the only garment she had been wearing when they sealed her in the transport pod, was torn in several places and stained with things she preferred not to catalog. Her scales, which should have been deep iridescent violet, had faded to a dull gray lavender. Her horns, which should have been polished obsidian curves, were chalky and cracked at the tips. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who had been thrown away. The airlock hissed. The inner door opened. And, standing there, in the yellow-lit rectangle of a ship that looked like it had been assembled by an optimistic committee, was a human boy. He was maybe 17 in human years. Kael'thara knew what humans were. She had studied them as part of her xenobiology coursework, one of the newer species to achieve interstellar capability, notable primarily for their absurd biological adaptability and their equally absurd tendency to befriend things that could kill them. The Galactic Council classified them as a Level 3 civilization, which meant they had faster-than-light travel, but still argued about what to have for dinner. This particular human had brown skin, black hair that stuck up in several directions as though it had been styled by a small explosion, and eyes that were very dark and very wide, and were currently doing the thing that eyes do when they encounter something their brain has no filing system for. He stared at her. She stared at him. He was holding a box. The box was yellow and had writing on it in a human script that Kael'thara's translation implant. Still functional, bless whatever engineer had built it to military spec. Decoded as Cookie Variety Pack. Now, with 20% more cookie. The human boy opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. His brain was visibly performing emergency triage on the situation. Strange alien, abandoned station, probably should be scared. Why is she looking at the box like that? Ah, he said. His voice cracked on a single syllable. Not from fear. From a specific hormonal betrayal that human adolescent males experienced when their vocal cords could not decide what frequency to commit to. He flushed. The blood rushed to the surface of his face, turning his brown cheeks a shade darker, and Kael'thara watched this happen with the detached fascination of a biologist observing a specimen display an unexpected response. "This is Relay Station Gamma 9, she said. Her own voice came out like gravel dragged across rust. She had not spoken aloud in 4 months. There had been no one to speak to. She had talked to herself for the first 7 months, narrating her actions, reciting academic papers from memory, arguing with her father in conversations he would never hear. But eventually the energy cost of producing sound outweighed the psychological benefit, and she had stopped. The human blinked. "You speak Terran Standard? I have a translation implant." "Oh." He looked at the implant's external node, a small silver disc behind her left ear. He looked at her. He looked at the corridor behind her, dark and humming with residual power. He looked back at her. "Are you supposed to be here?" The laugh that came out of Kael'thara surprised them both. It was not a pleasant sound. It had edges. It scraped its way out of her throat and fell on the floor between them like something dropped from a height. "No," she said. "I'm not supposed to be anywhere." The boy processed this. She could see him processing it, his eyebrows doing complicated choreography, his mouth cycling through several shapes as potential responses formed and were discarded. Humans wore their cognition on their faces. It was remarkable. Drakenari faces were scaled and rigid, built for heat resistance, not expression. Watching a human think was like watching weather happen on a very small planet. He looked at the torn maintenance manual page, still clutched in her left hand. Looked at her mouth, at the gray dust on her lips that was pulped cellulose. Something behind his eyes connected. "Were you eating that?" She said nothing. Saying nothing was easier than constructing a lie or admitting a truth, and she had gotten very good at it. He looked at the box in his hands. Looked at her. The weather on his face shifted, clouds parting, something warm and terrible moving in, something that Kale Thura recognized with a jolt because she had not seen it directed at her in a very long time and had forgotten what it looked like from the outside. Concern. Real, unperformative concern. The kind that costs something. He held out the box. Do you want a cookie? Kale Thura stared at the box. The yellow packaging. The cheerful human script promising 20% more cookie, as though the universe's fundamental problem was a cookie deficit that this box was personally committed to solving. Her stomach made a sound, not a growl. Something deeper. Something her body had stopped bothering to produce months ago because there had been nothing to produce it for. And now, confronted with the proximity of actual food, her digestive system lurched back online like a generator coughing to life in a blackout. She took the box. Her claws punctured the cardboard. She pulled it open with the care of someone disarming a device. Not because she thought it was dangerous, but because her hand was shaking in a way she could not control. Inside were individually wrapped cookies in 4 varieties. She could smell them through the wrappers. Sugar, flour, some kind of fat, chocolate. She did not know the word yet, but her nose cataloged the compound as a complex alkaloid with a richness that made something behind her eyes sting. She ate the first cookie with the wrapper still on. The boy watched. He did not say anything. He did not laugh or flinch or step back. He stood in the airlock doorway with his hands now empty and his face doing something quiet and complicated, and he let her eat. She ate the second cookie without the wrapper. It was chocolate. The taste of it hit her nervous system like a voltage spike, sweet and bitter and dense with fat and sugar and everything her body had been screaming for. And her knees buckled, not from weakness, but from the sheer neurological overload of flavor after 11 months of cellulose and adhesive paste. She sat on the floor of the docking bay and ate cookies. The boy sat down across from her, cross-legged, patient, like this was a normal thing that was happening, and he was fine with it, and there was no rush. "I'm Eli," he said, after she had eaten the 6th cookie. She looked at him, crumbs on her claws, chocolate smeared across scales that used to shine. "Kale Thura von Drexis," she said, "third born of the Ember Throne." Ili nodded slowly. "Cool," he said, with the specific intonation of a human who did not know what any of those words meant, but was committed to being supportive about it. She almost laughed again. This time, it would have been a different sound. She caught it behind her teeth and ate another cookie instead. The station hummed around them. The boy's battered ship clicked and cooled in the docking clamp. Somewhere in the corridor behind Kale Thura, 6,412 pages of maintenance manuals sat in a pile, their career as food now mercifully ended. She had so many questions. Why was he here? How had he found this station? What was a human teenager doing alone in a dead sector of space in a ship that looked like a municipal recycling project? But the questions could wait. The cookies could not. Eli Vasquez had not planned to find a dragon princess on a dead relay station in the middle of nowhere. His plan, and he used the word generously, had been to hide. Hiding was something Eli had gotten good at over the past 2 years, ever since the Terran Colonial Authority had decided that his family's salvage operation in the Kepler Fringe was operating without proper licensing, which was true, and that the appropriate response was to seize their ship, arrest his mother, and assign Eli to a colonial youth integration facility, which was the government's way of saying orphanage without using a word that made voters uncomfortable. His mother was still in a detention center on Kepler 7. He had not been able to contact her in 14 months. The integration facility had been a concrete building on a mining moon where 37 children slept in rows and learned skills that would make them useful to the Colonial Authority's labor pipeline. Eli had lasted 6 weeks before he climbed through a ventilation shaft. Humans and ventilation shafts had a relationship that bordered on cultural tradition. Stole a decommissioned survey shuttle from the facility's maintenance yard and flew it into the deep black with nothing but a box of emergency rations, a star chart his mother had taught him to read when he was 9, and a conviction that anywhere was better than a place that wanted to turn him into a tool. The shuttle was the one currently docked to Gamma 9. He had named it the Cardboard Valkyrie, partly because it looked like it was made of cardboard and partly because his mother had told him stories about Valkyries when he was small, warriors who carried the fallen to somewhere better. The shuttle was not carrying Eli to somewhere better. It was carrying him to somewhere else, which was close enough. He had been bouncing between dead stations and abandoned outposts for months, siphoning fuel from derelict ships, trading minor repair work at fringe settlements for food and water. The cookie box was a luxury. He had gotten it from a Telari merchant at a waypoint station 3 weeks ago in exchange for rewiring the merchant's cargo manifest system. The Telari had thrown in the cookies as a bonus, amused by the human concept of dessert as a separate food category. Eli had been saving the cookies. For what? He was not sure. A birthday, a bad day, a moment that needed something sweet to balance it. Watching a starving alien princess eat them on the floor of a dead station was not what he had imagined, but it felt right in a way he could not articulate, like a key finding a lock it did not know existed. He did not ask her questions while she ate. This was a skill he had learned from his mother, who had been a salvager for 20 years and understood that when you found something damaged, you did not interrogate it. You stabilized it first. You asked questions when it could afford the energy to answer them. Kalthyra ate 17 cookies. She ate them with a systematic intensity that Eli recognized as triage, her body telling her brain what it needed, and her brain complying without aesthetic consideration. Wrappers accumulated around her like shed chrysalis casings. Her hands, clawed, scaled, trembling with a fine vibration that spoke of deep systemic exhaustion, moved with decreasing urgency as the sugar and fat entered her bloodstream, and her physiology began the slow pivot from crisis to recovery. When she stopped, she sat with her back against the docking bay wall and closed her eyes. Her breathing changed, deeper, slower. The membrane of her damaged wings shifted slightly, a reflexive response to caloric intake, her body already redirecting resources toward repair. Eli sat and waited. He was good at waiting. 2 years of running had taught him that patience was not passive. It was a kind of work, the work of being present without demanding anything from the moment. "Your ship," she said, without opening her eyes. "Why is it so small?" It was free. When I opened, gold with a vertical slit pupil that dilated slightly as it focused on him. "Free. I stole it." Both eyes opened. "You are a thief." "I'm a lot of things. Thief is the one that got me a ship." She studied him. He could feel the weight of it. Alien cognition working through alien frameworks, processing him through categories he could not guess at. He held still and let her look. He had nothing to hide that was worth the effort of hiding. "You are young," she said. 17. Earth years. I do not know what that means in real time. About 17 orbits of a medium-sized yellow star around which a species of mostly hairless primates evolved, developed nuclear weapons, argued about whether those weapons were a good idea for about 80 years, and then built spaceships to get away from the argument. Something happened on her face. The scales around her mouth shifted. The rigid architecture of Draconari facial structure did not allow for the full range of human expression, but something moved there, a twitch, a rearrangement, that Eli interpreted as either amusement or indigestion. Given the 17 cookies, both were plausible. "You are strange," she said. "Yeah, I get that a lot." She looked at the corridor behind her. Dark, humming, a year of solitary confinement in every shadow. "I have been here for 11 months, she said. "My family sent me here to disappear." She said it flat. No infliction, no drama. The way you say a thing that has lived inside you so long it has worn grooves in your throat and comes out smooth and terrible, polished by repetition. Eli did not react with shock or pity. He reacted with recognition. Something in his chest cavity did a slow rotation, like a compass needle finding north. "My mom's in a detention center on Kepler 7, he said. "The Colonial Authority took her because we didn't have the right paperwork. I've been running since." The station hummed. 2 thrown-away people sat on a cold floor, surrounded by cookie wrappers, and looked at each other with the specific understanding of those who have been deemed inconvenient by systems larger than themselves. "Your family," Eli said. "They're Draconari?" "Yes." "The big ones?" "With the fire and He made a vague gesture near his mouth that was either miming flame breathing or having a dental emergency. The fire and, she confirmed. And they just put you on a station with no food? They put me on a station with Velnari nutrient blocks. What's a Velnari? A fungal collective that absorbs nutrition through its skin. And you're not a fungal collective. I'm not a fungal collective. Eli stared at her. The weather on his face, she was beginning to read it, the way she read academic papers, parsing the structure to find the argument, shifted from overcast to something darker. Formation. His jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his knees, closed into fists and then opened again, fingers spreading wide, a deliberate release. That's murder, he said. Slow, but that's what it is. In Draconari law, is classified as exile. The distinction is procedural. The distinction is garbage. She looked at him, this small, breakable human boy with his cracking voice and his stolen ship and his box of cookies and his absolute, burning certainty that what had been done to her was wrong. He had no power, no resources, no army. He had a shuttle held together by optimism and a vocabulary that included calling Royal Draconari legal frameworks garbage. Something in her chest moved. Not her heart. Draconari hearts were positioned differently, lower, behind the ventral plates. Something else. Something she had sealed shut months ago and put in storage and told herself she did not need. She put it back in storage. Not yet. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Do you have more food on your ship? Eli's face did something complicated. Guilt and calculation and a rapid inventory of his supplies conducted entirely through eyebrow movement. Some. Not a lot. I got about 3 weeks of rations if I stretch them. Protein bars, mostly. Some dried fruit. A truly upsetting amount of instant noodles. What are noodles? Oh man. He rubbed his face with both hands. And when they came away, he was smiling. Not a performance smile, not a diplomatic smile, but the uncontrolled grin of someone who had just discovered the one bright spot in an otherwise catastrophic situation. Okay, we're going to fix this. But first, noodles. You need to experience noodles. He stood up with the abrupt energy of a human whose body had decided that a problem existed and sitting was no longer compatible with solving it. Kael'thira watched him move. Quick, loose, a gait that wasted energy in every direction because humans had energy to waste, their metabolisms burning through calories like small furnaces, and followed him toward his ship's airlock. The interior of the cardboard Valkyrie was exactly what the exterior promised. Small, dented, functional in the way that a chair with 3 legs is functional if you lean the right way. The cockpit and living space were the same room, separated by a curtain that had been fashioned from what appeared to be a thermal emergency blanket. The navigation console was held together with adhesive strips, and what Kael'thira's translation implant informed her was called duct tape, which was apparently a human engineering philosophy that had achieved cultural significance. Eli moved through the small space with the choreographed efficiency of someone who had memorized every centimeter. He opened a storage compartment, pulled out a sealed container, and extracted a brick of dried noodles wrapped in foil. You boil water, he narrated, filling a small pot from the ship's water reclamation system. You drop these in, you wait 3 minutes. You add the flavor packet. You eat them, and you feel like a person again. I'm not a person. I am Draconari. You'll feel like a Draconari again. Same principle. He boiled water on a heating element that took 7 minutes to reach temperature, during which time Kael'thira sat on the floor of his ship. There were no passenger seats, which told her everything about how this vessel had been designed, and for whom, and examined her surroundings. The walls had markings. Not decorative. Functional. Star charts drawn in marker on bare metal. Routes calculated and recalculated, arrows, and notations in a handwriting that shifted from careful to hurried, depending on the density of information. Trade outposts circled with dates. Fuel depot locations with stock levels noted and crossed out as they depleted. A map of survival, annotated in real time by someone who was making it up as he went along. And in one corner, small, almost hidden behind a bundle of spare wiring, a photograph. Physical photograph, printed on actual paper. Kael'thara recognized the material with a complicated internal response, showing a woman with brown skin and black hair and Eli's exact smile, standing in front of a much larger ship with her arms crossed and her chin lifted in the universal posture of someone who was proud of what she had built. Eli's mother. Kael'thara looked at the photograph, looked away. The dual current thing happened, the surface of her attention returning to the noodles and the boiling water and the boy chattering about sodium content, while underneath something vast and pressurized recognized a familiar shape. A parent, a separation, a child in a box, floating. She counted the rivets on the nearest wall panel. 14. The seventh one was slightly recessed. She stared at the seventh rivet until the subsurface pressure equalized and she could breathe normally. Here, Eli handed her the pot. He had no bowls. The pot was the bowl. He handed her a fork, a human-eating utensil that looked like a tiny metal trident designed for very small gladiatorial combat. She took the fork. Her claws made holding it awkward. The noodles were slippery and yellow and steaming, and they smelled like salt and something savory that her translation implant identified as artificial chicken flavor, which raised more questions than it answered. She ate. The noodles were the second greatest thing she had ever tasted, after the chocolate cookies, and the combined effect of actual food hitting a system that had been running on cellulose for nearly a year produced a physiological response that she was not prepared for. Her flame glands activated. Not a full flame. She did not have the caloric reserve for that, but a heat bloom, a flush of warmth that traveled from her core to her extremities and made her scales flush from gray lavender back toward their natural violet for 3 full seconds before the color faded. Whoa, Eli said. Did you change color? My flame gland are responding to caloric intake. You have flame glands? I am Drakenari. Right. The fire and... He did the gesture again. Can you actually breathe fire? Not currently. I lack the metabolic reserves. When properly nourished, my flame is... She paused. Her flame was the thing that had made her an outcast. The wrong colors. The wrong patterns. The thing that marked her as broken in the eyes of every system she had been born into. My flame is unusual, she finished. Eli heard the pause. She saw him hear it, his eyes tracking the gap in her sentence the way a navigator tracks a gravitational anomaly, noting its presence, filing it, not pushing toward it. Smart boy, smarter than his stolen ship, and his cracking voice suggested. Unusual how? He asked, not pushing, just leaving the door open. It is multichromatic. It shifts with my emotional state. In Drakenari culture, this is considered a defect. A defect. Flame purity determines social standing. Royal fire is white. Pure plasma. My fire is... She searched for the word. Her translation implant offered several options. She chose the one that felt most accurate. Chaotic. Eli sat back. He was quiet for a moment, which Kael'thara had already learned was unusual for him. When he spoke, his voice had lost the nervous, chattering quality and dropped into something lower and steadier. On Earth, he said, there used to be these things called opals. Gemstones. They were valuable specifically because they weren't one color. The light hit them, and they'd show every color at once. Blue, green, red, gold, shifting, changing. People went crazy for them, built entire industries around digging them up. Kings wore them. They were considered the most beautiful stones on the planet. He looked at her. I'm just saying, one species defect is another species opal. She said nothing. She ate noodles. She stared at the 7th rivet on the wall panel, and the subsurface pressure did something it was not supposed to do. It did not equalize. It increased. It pushed against the sealed compartment where she had stored the things she did not need, and the compartment's walls were thinner than she remembered, and the noodles were warm in her stomach, and the boy was kind in a way that cost him something, and the rivet was just a rivet. It could not hold what she was asking it to hold. She ate noodles. So what's the plan? Eli asked, after a comfortable silence that lasted long enough for Kael'thara to finish the pot and begins seriously considering whether the pot itself was edible. I mean, you've been here 11 months. Do you have a plan? My plan was to not die. Okay, good plan. Simple. I respect it. What about a plan that includes, like, leaving? Leaving requires a ship with interstellar capability. Your vessel, the Cardboard Valkyrie. The Cardboard Valkyrie does not appear to have interstellar capability. She does not. She's got a range of about 40 light years on a full tank, and the tank is not full. I came here because the star charts showed a relay station with potential fuel reserves. There are no fuel reserves. This station runs on nuclear decay. Eli's face did the weather thing again. Storm clouds. He ran a hand through his hair, which rearranged itself into a new configuration of disorder. Okay, he said. So we're both stuck. It would appear so. On a dead station. Yes. With about 3 weeks of food between us. Approximately. He looked at her. She looked at him. The situation was objectively terrible. 2 castaways with incompatible biologies, limited supplies, no communication capabilities, and no reason to expect rescue from anyone in the known galaxy. Ili Grineth. It was the wrong response to the situation by every rational metric, and it hit Kael'thara like a physical force, the sheer irrational, spectacularly human refusal to match his emotional state to his circumstances. He was stuck on a dead station with a starving dragon princess, and 3 weeks of instant noodles, and he was grinning like someone had handed him a project. 3 weeks is a lot of time, he said. My mom always said you can fix anything if you've got time and duct tape. I do not think duct tape will resolve our current situation. You haven't seen what I can do with duct tape. He stood up. The grin had not gone anywhere. If anything, it had intensified, achieving a luminosity that Kael'thara found biologically confusing. Here's what we're going to do, he said. First, I'm going to go through this entire station and catalog everything that still works. Power systems, communication arrays, anything. Second, you're going to eat real food and rest and let your body start repairing whatever 11 months of paper did to it. Third, we're going to figure out how to get a signal out. To whom? To anyone. There are ships out there. Fringe traders, independent operators, people like me who fly the gaps between official routes. If we can get a signal out, someone will come. And if no one comes, he looked at her. The grin softened into something else, not less bright, but differently bright. A steadier light. Then we'll figure something else out. That's what humans do. We figure stuff out. It's basically our whole thing. Kael'thara wanted to argue. She had been trained in argument, had built her intellectual life around the rigorous construction and dismantling of positions, and she could feel the counter-arguments stacking up, the statistical improbability of rescue, the limitations of their combined resources, the vast indifference of the sector they were stranded in. She did not argue. Instead, she said, I would like more noodles, please. Eli's grin went supernova. Coming right up. He turned to the water heater, and Kael'thara sat on the floor of his ridiculous ship and listened to the water boil and thought about opals and about a boy who looked at chaos and saw beauty and about the specific, terrifying warmth of being seen by someone who had no obligation to look. The sealed compartment in her chest creaked. She let it creak. Not yet, but maybe soon. The station, it turned out, was less dead than Kael'thara had believed. She had lived here for 11 months and mapped every corridor, every access panel, every sealed door and collapsed junction. She had cataloged the station's failures with the thoroughness of someone writing an autopsy report. Life support, minimal, running on automated backup. Gravity generation, functional at 60%, which was why her tail dragged. The lower gravity made compensation harder, not easier, for Draconari physiology that had evolved in heavy volcanic environments. Communication array, offline. Navigation beacons, offline. Secondary power grid, offline. She had accepted these facts the way she accepted her exile, as conditions to endure, not problems to solve. Survival had narrowed her cognitive range to the immediate. Find food, regulate body temperature, do not die. Long-term planning required optimism, and optimism required energy, and energy required calories she did not have. Eli had calories. Not many, but enough to fuel a brain that operated on a fundamentally different principle than hers. He spent the first 2 days crawling through the station's infrastructure with a toolkit he had assembled from his ship's spare parts and whatever he could scavenge from the station's maintenance closets. He talked while he worked, constantly, an unbroken stream of narration, observation, hypothesis, and tangent that Kael'thira found initially exhausting, and then, gradually, something else, ambient. Background radiation. A frequency her system tuned to without deciding to. Okay, so this relay junction. See these connectors? These aren't standard Galactic Council spec. These are Karathi design. The Karathi built relay stations about 60 years ago for the mining consortiums, and their engineering philosophy was basically make it work forever and make it ugly. Which means this stuff is built to last. The reason your communication array reads as offline isn't because it's broken. It's because the software controller crashed and nobody rebooted it. He was upside down inside an access panel, his legs sticking out at angles that suggested either extreme flexibility or a casual relationship with spinal integrity. His voice echoed inside the metal cavity. Software crashes are not hardware failures. Software crashes are fixable. This is fixable. You have been inside that panel for 40 minutes, Kael'thira said. She was sitting against the opposite wall, eating a protein bar from Eli Supplies. Her body was responding to consistent nutrition with a speed that surprised her. Not recovery, not yet, but stabilization. The tremor in her hands had reduced. Her scales were holding color for longer periods. Her flame glands had activated twice more, brief heat blooms that made her chest warm without producing visible fire. 40 productive minutes, Eli called from inside the wall. There's a whole secondary bus in here that nobody's touched. The Karathi put in redundancies like they were getting paid per circuit, which they probably were. I think I can reroute the communication array through this bus and bypass the crash software entirely. That would give us what range? A pause. Clanking. Something sparked, and Eli said a word that Kael'thira's translation implant rendered as a creative anatomical impossibility. Short range. Maybe 5 light years. Enough to hit any ship passing through the sector. No ships pass through this sector. No ships have passed through this sector while you've been here. That's 11 months of data. The Kepler fringe trade routes are shifting. I've seen it. The independent operators are moving further out because the colonial authority is cracking down on unlicensed trade in the inner sectors. Ships are going to start passing through dead zones like this because dead zones are the only places where nobody's checking your paperwork. He slid out of the panel, grease on his forehead, a burn on his left hand that he was ignoring with the practiced nonchalance of someone who burned himself regularly. His hair had achieved a new altitude. I need 3 days, he said. 3 days, and I can get us a signal. And if no one is within range, then I modify the signal. I can pulse it. Low power, repeating, like a lighthouse. It just sits there broadcasting until someone hears it. How long could the power core sustain that? Decades. This station's decay core is barely tapped. The Karathi really did over-engineer everything. He sat down across from her, mirroring her position against the wall, and drank water from a container that had seen better centuries. His breathing was elevated. His skin had a sheen of exertion. He was working harder than his caloric intake supported, and Kael'thira could see the math of it. He was burning through his reserves to fix a station that was not his problem for a person who was not his responsibility, and he was doing it with the focused, cheerful intensity of someone who had found a purpose and was running on it like fuel. She had seen this before. In herself, the years of writing papers and challenging courts and being loud and inconvenient that had been the same engine. The refusal to be passive in the face of a system designed to make passivity the only survivable option. You should eat more, she said. You are expending resources you cannot replace. I'm Phoenix. You're not fine. Your caloric output exceeds your intake by approximately. I'm fine, Kale. He said it with a grin, and the abbreviated form of her name landed with a weight that was disproportionate to its 2 syllables. No one had ever shortened her name. Draconari names were formal structures. You used them in full or you used titles. The idea of trimming syllables for convenience, or the thing she was not going to name, was not part of her cultural framework. That is not my name. It's your name with fewer steps. Efficiency. Draconari names are spoken in full. Cool. Kale. She stared at him. He stared back, grinning, and the absolute bulletproof audacity of this boy. This runaway, this thief, this tiny human in a dead sector of space with grease on his face and a burn on his hand, made something in her chest cavity execute a maneuver that her anatomy textbooks had not prepared her for. The seal compartment did not just creak. It shifted, a structural settling, like a building accepting a new foundation. She ate her protein bar and said nothing, and then nothing was loud. On the third day, Eli got the communication array working. The signal was weak, a whisper into the void. But it was there, a repeating pulse on a broad frequency spectrum, broadcasting the station's coordinates, and a simple message that Eli had composed in Terran Standard, Galactic Common, and 3 trade pigeons he had picked up during his months in the Fringe. Relay Station Gamma, 9. 2 survivors. Requesting assistance. We'll trade labor for transport. We'll trade labor for transport. Kale Thyra read from the screen. You are offering my labor as well? Our labor. Plural. Fringe operators don't respond to distress calls out of charity. They respond because they need something. Every ship out here is understaffed. We offer skills, they give us a ride. What skills do I possess that would be valuable to a Fringe operator? Eli looked at her. You're a Draconari princess with a xenobiology background who survived 11 months on cellulose. You're the most resourceful person on this station. I'm one of 2 people on this station. And you're the most resourceful one. I'm just the guy with the duct tape. She wanted to argue that his self-deprecation was inaccurate and that his engineering capability, navigational knowledge, and social intelligence represented a skill set considerably more valuable than duct tape proficiency. She did not say this. She was still learning how human conversational dynamics worked. Specifically, the way humans deflected compliments about themselves while simultaneously seeking confirmation that the deflection would be challenged. It was an elaborate dance that Draconari culture did not practice. Draconari stated their capabilities as fact. False modesty was considered a form of lying. You are considerably more than the guy with the duct tape, she said, because she was Draconari and Draconari stated facts. Eli's face did something new. The blood-rushing thing happened again, the darkening of his cheeks, but this time it was accompanied by a stillness, a pause in the weather. He looked at her, and for a moment the constant motion of his expression stopped, and there was just a boy, looking at someone who had said something true about him that he did not often hear. Thanks, Kale, he said. Quiet. She looked at the communication screen. We should discuss contingencies. Right. Yes. Contingencies. They had 12 days of food remaining, stretched across 2 metabolisms that needed different things. Eli had been supplementing Kale Thyra's diet with the protein bars and dried fruit from his supplies, and she had been eating them in quantities that were not enough but were infinitely more than paper. Her body was using the nutrition to triage its worst damage. Organ function first, then muscle density, then scale regeneration. Her wings remained slack. Wing membrane repair required sustained caloric surplus over weeks, and they did not have weeks of surplus. They had weeks of rationing. On the 5th day after the signal began broadcasting, Kale Thyra produced fire. It happened without warning. She was sitting in what had become their shared space, the docking bay, where they spent evenings because it was the warmest part of the station, the cardboard Valkyrie's hull radiating residual engine heat. And Eli was telling her about Earth, about oceans, which she found conceptually distressing, about rain, which she found physically offensive, about a food called pizza that he described with a reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. It's bread, he said, but flat, and you put sauce on it, tomato sauce, and then cheese, which is, okay, cheese is a whole thing. It's made from animal milk that you let go wrong on purpose. You deliberately spoil your food, and then consume the spoilage. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. It's good. It's so good, Kale. When we get out of here, I'm buying you a pizza. With what resources? You are a fugitive with no currency. Details. I'll figure it out. The point is, her chest ignited, not metaphorically. Her flame glands discharged, and fire erupted from her mouth in a plume that shot 3 feet forward and hit the opposite wall of the docking bay and left a scorch mark shaped roughly like an exclamation point. The fire was not white. It was every color, blue at its core, shifting through green and gold and violet and a deep, pulsing crimson at its edges, the chromatic chaos that had marked her as defective since adolescence. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then it guttered and died because she did not have the reserves to sustain it. And she sat there with smoke curling from between her teeth and the taste of ozone in her mouth and the old, familiar shame climbing her spine like ivy. Eli was on his feet, not retreating, standing. His eyes were wide and his mouth was open and the scorch mark on the wall behind him was still glowing faintly. And he was looking at her with an expression that she could not parse because it did not match any of the responses she had been trained to expect. The responses she knew: disappointment, disgust, clinical concern, the polite, masked alarm of someone witnessing a defect manifest. Eli's face held none of these. His face held what her translation implant, after cycling through several emotional frameworks, could only render as wonder. That, he said, was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The sealed compartment in her chest broke open. Not cracked, not shifted, broke. The wall she had built around the thing she did not need. The warmth, the wanting, the terrible vulnerability of caring whether someone stayed, collapsed inward with the structural finality of a controlled demolition, and everything she had stored there flooded her system at once, and she could not breathe, and her vision went liquid, and she discovered that Drakenari could cry, which was something her species did not do, except apparently when they did. She turned away from him. The motion was sharp, defensive. Her wings, useless, slack, humiliating, pulled tight against her back in a gesture that was the Drakenari equivalent of crossing your arms. Closing off. Do not look at me. Eli did not approach. He did not cross the space between them. He sat back down, slowly, and he was quiet, and the quiet was not empty. It was the kind of quiet that holds weight without crushing. The kind her mother had been able to make before her mother died, back when someone in the palace still touched Kale Thyra without flinching. Her mother had died when Kale Thyra was 11. Fever sickness. Fussed. She had not thought about her mother in months. She had packed that away too, in a different compartment, a deeper one that even the breaking open of the first could not reach. Except Eli's quiet reached it. Not by force, by resemblance. My fire is wrong, she said, and her voice was gravel again, worse than gravel, broken glass dragged through ash. It has been wrong since I was 14. It marks me. My father cannot look at me. My sisters pretended I was a stranger. The court called me corrupted. I published papers and asked questions and made myself loud because if they were going to exile me for existing wrong, then I was going to exist as loudly as possible before they did. She paused, breathing. I was never going to survive this station, she said. The paper was buying time. Time for what? I did not know. I think I was buying time because stopping felt like letting him win. She turned back to face Eli. Her eyes were wet, gold, slit-pupiled, ancient in the way that Drakenari eyes were always ancient, carrying the weight of a species that had been old when humans were still figuring out fire, and wet and tired, and looking at a boy who had given her cookies and called her chaos beautiful, and sat in her quiet without trying to fill it. You came here by accident, she said. I came here because the star chart showed a relay station with potential fuel. There is no fuel here. No, he was quiet for a beat. But there was you. The docking bay held the silence. The scorch mark on the wall glowed. The cardboard Valkyrie's hull ticked as it cooled. Somewhere in the station, the communication array pulsed its repeating signal into the black. 2 survivors, requesting assistance, willing to work. Kale Thyra wiped her eyes with the back of her clawed hand. The gesture left faint scratches on her scales. She did not notice. When we leave this station, she said, I am going to destroy the system that put me here. She said it the way she had said everything since the compartment broke, without performance, without drama, with the flat, geological certainty of tectonic plates. Eli looked at her. The grin was gone. In its place was something older, something that did not belong on a 17-year-old face, but lived there anyway, put there by detention centers and stolen ships, and 14 months without hearing his mother's voice. Good, he said. I'll help. You cannot help. You are one human with a stolen shuttle. And you're one princess eating paper. Look at us now. She looked at him. He looked at her. The absurdity of it. A dragon princess and a human boy, starving on a dead station, planning the dismantlement of an interstellar empire between bites of protein bar, should have been comedic. It was comedic. It was also the truest thing either of them had said in a very long time. On the 9th day, the communication array received a response. Eli was asleep. He slept in the cardboard Valkyrie's pilot's seat, which reclined to an angle that was approximately 15 degrees short of horizontal, and Kael'thira had learned to identify his sleep states by the rhythm of his breathing. Light sleep was even and shallow. Deep sleep was punctuated by small sounds that her translation implant could not classify because they were not language, just the unconscious noises of a human body at rest. She was sitting in the docking bay, awake, because Drakenari sleep cycles were longer than human ones, and she had adjusted to spending the hours of his sleep in something between meditation and surveillance, listening to the station, feeling its vibrations through the floor, monitoring the slow processes of her body's repair. The communication panel beeped. She was on her feet before the second beep. Move to the panel. Read the incoming signal. It was in trade pidgin. Rough, abbreviated, the linguistic equivalent of a handshake between strangers who did not trust each other, but needed something from each other. Received your signal. Freighter Iron Veil, Captain Sarin UX. 15 hours out. What can you offer? Kael'thira's claws hovered over the response interface. Her heart, positioned low, behind the ventral plates, was beating at a rate that suggested her body understood the significance of this moment, even as her brain was still processing it. 15 hours. After 11 months. 15 hours. She typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again. Deleted. Her training in diplomacy and rhetoric, 12 years of formal education in the art of saying the right thing to the right audience, collapsed under the weight of what she actually wanted to say, which was please come get us, which was too raw, too naked, too much like begging, and she was Kael'thira von Drexus, third born of the Ember Throne, and she did not beg. She wrote, 2 skilled workers, engineer and xenobiologist, will contract for transport to nearest trade hub. Terms negotiable on arrival. She hit send. Then she went to the cardboard Valkyrie and shook Eli awake. He came online the way humans did, poorly, blinking, disoriented, his brain booting up in stages like an old computer. Wah, what a ship responded. He was fully awake in under a second. The fastest cognitive transition she had ever witnessed. What? When? Who? Freighter Iron Veil. Captain Sarnux. 15 hours. Eli stared at her. His eyes were sleep-glazed, and his hair was compressed on one side and elevated on the other, creating an asymmetry that should have looked absurd and did look absurd and also looked like the most important face she had ever memorized. He smiled. Not the grin. The other thing. The steady light. We're getting off this station, he said. It would appear so. We're getting off the station, and I'm buying you pizza. You have no currency. Details. He grabbed her hand, her clawed, scaled hand, and his small, soft primate hand, and the contact was warm and intentional, and she did not pull away. The sealed compartment was open. She let it be open. 15 hours. The Iron Veil arrived in 14 hours and 37 minutes, which Kael'thira knew because she had counted every one of them. The freighter was enormous. Not by Drakenari standards. Drakenari capital ships were measured in kilometers, but by the standards of the Fringe, where ships were practical things built for carrying cargo through dangerous space. The Iron Veil was a cathedral of function. It materialized on the docking bay viewport like a slow-moving continent, its hull dark and pitted with micrometeorite scars, its running lights amber and red, its docking array extending toward Gamma 9 with the mechanical patience of something that had done this 10,000 times. Captain Saranux was Telari. Tall, thin, skin the color of deep water, with bioluminescent patterns along her jaw that shifted when she spoke, a secondary communication layer that Kael'Thir's translation implant could not parse, but that clearly carried emotional subtext. She stepped onto the station with 2 crew members behind her and looked at Kael'Thira and Eli with the expression of someone assessing cargo. "Drakenari," she said, looking at Kael'Thira. The bioluminescent patterns flared blue, which might have been surprise or might have been suspicion. "Yes, long way from the Ember territories. I am aware." Saranux's eyes, solid black, no whites, no iris, the deep ocean eyes of species that had evolved in perpetual dark, tracked down Kael'Thira's frame. The faded scales, the slack wings, the torn ceremonial tunic that had been patched in 3 places with strips of thermal blanket material, because Eli had insisted she could not meet potential rescuers in clothing that had more holes than cloth. "You've been here a while," Saranux said. 11 months. Ow! Creatively, the captain's bioluminescence shifted. Green. Amusement. Maybe. She looked at Eli. "And you?" "Eli Voskowitz. Human. Ido Enhens. Your ship." She glanced at the cardboard Valkyrie through the viewport. The bioluminescence went through 3 colors in rapid succession, settling on a deep violet that Kael'Thira suspected was the Telari equivalent of someone trying very hard not to laugh. "Your ship is something. She got me here. She looks like she barely did that." Saranux turned back to Kael'Thira. "Your signal said engineer and xenobiologist. I need both. My drive coil technician jumped ship at Varant for last month, and my cargo includes live biological specimens that nobody on my crew knows how to keep alive. You work passage to Meridian Station." "Fair terms. Fair terms," Kael'Thira said. "Fair terms," Eli said. Saranux nodded. "Get your things. We leave in 1 hour." Their things took 4 minutes to collect. Eli's supplies fit in a single bag. Kael'Thira had no possessions. She stood in the docking bay of Relay Station Gamma 9 with nothing in her hands and looked at the corridor that led to the section where she had lived for 11 months. The floor where she had slept, the panel where she had found a maintenance manuals, the corner where she had sat in the dark during the first month and made sounds that were not words and were not crying because Drakenari did not cry, except when they did. She turned away from the corridor. Eli was standing by the airlock, waiting, not rushing her. His bag over one shoulder, his hands in his pockets, his face doing the quiet thing, the steady light thing that he saved for moments when words would be wrong. She walked to him. They boarded the Iron Veil. The station shrank in the viewport as the freighter pulled away. Kael'Thira watched it diminish, the boxy, graceless structure where she had been sent to vanish becoming exactly what her father had intended it to be. Small, forgettable, a footnote in a sector of space that nobody visited. She did not vanish. That fact sat in her body like a coal, small and hot and permanent. She carried it with her as the station disappeared, and the stars rearranged themselves around the Iron Veil's trajectory, and the void that had been her prison became a thing she was moving through rather than trapped inside. The Iron Veil's crew was 12 beings of 7 species. The ship ran trade routes through the outer fringe, the lawless margin of explored space where the Galactic Council's authority dissolved into suggestion, and the only law that held was mutual benefit. Ships out here survived on reputation and skill, not documentation. Nobody asked where you came from. They asked what you could do. Kael'Thira could do quite a lot. The biological specimens in the cargo hold turned out to be a collection of bioluminescent marine organisms from a water world called Tessera 6, destined for a research facility on Meridian Station. They were dying. The previous handler had maintained them in standard saline suspension, which was catastrophically wrong. Tesseran organisms required a mineral-specific brackish solution with precise temperature cycling to simulate their home world's tidal patterns. Kael'Thira identified the problem within 20 minutes of examining the containment tanks. She had studied Tesseran biology in her 3rd year at the university one of the subjects her tutors had encouraged, because xenobiology was considered an acceptably quiet pursuit for a problematic princess. She recalibrated the tanks, adjusted the mineral composition using compounds she synthesized from the ship's chemical stores, programmed a temperature cycle that mimicked Tessera 6's 18-hour tidal rhythm. Within 2 days, the organism's bioluminescence returned, soft pulses of blue and green light that filled the cargo hold with shifting aurora patterns. Saranax watched this happen from the cargo bay doorway. Her own bioluminescence responded to the organism's light, patterns chasing patterns in a visual conversation that crossed species boundaries. "You know what you're doing," she said. "I was educated. You are more than educated." That recalibration, my last handler couldn't figure that out in 3 weeks. You did it in a day. Your last handler was not Draconari. My last handler was not you. Saranax's patterns shifted to a warm amber. There's more work where this came from, if you want it. The fringe always needs people who understand alien biology. Pays well. Pays in actual currency, which I'm told is useful. Kael'thira considered this. Employment. Income. The basic infrastructure of a life outside the one that had been taken from her. The idea of it was strange. Not because she could not do it, but because for 11 months her existence had been compressed to such a narrow bandwidth that the concept of a future with options in it felt like stepping from a closet into a field. "I will consider it," she said. "Consider fast. Meridian Station is 6 days out, and I know 3 captains who'd hire you today." Eli, meanwhile, had made himself indispensable in the engine room within hours of boarding. The Iron Veil's drive system was old, a Korathi design, like the relay station, built 40 years ago and maintained through a succession of technicians with varying levels of competence. The most recent technician had maintained it poorly. Eli found 17 issues in the first inspection, fixed 9 of them by the end of the first day, and presented Saranax with a prioritized maintenance schedule for the remaining 8 that included estimated costs, time requirements, and a hand-drawn diagram that was somehow more readable than the official schematics. "Where did you learn this?" Saranax asked, looking at the diagram. "My mom. She was a salvager. I grew up inside engines. She taught you well. She taught me everything." Saranax's bioluminescence did something complicated. She looked at Eli for a long moment, and Kael'thira, who was developing an increasingly sophisticated ability to read Telari emotional display patterns, interpreted the sequence as recognition followed by something protective followed by a decision. "Your mother," Saranax said. "Where is she?" "Detention Center. Kepler, 7. Colonial Authority." "What was the charge?" "Operating without a salvage license." "That's a fine, not detention. It's detention if you can't pay the fine, and you won't sign a labor contract." Saranax was quiet. Her patterns went dark, the Telari equivalent of a closed expression. "I know people on Kepler, 7, she said. "Fringe connections. People who move things, and people through channels the Colonial Authority doesn't monitor." Eli went still. The constant motion of him, the fidgeting, the hair touching, the weight shifting, all of it stopped, and what was left was a boy holding his breath. "I'm not promising anything," Saranax said, "but I'll ask." "Thank you." His voice did not crack. It came out whole and steady and thick with something he was holding behind his teeth. Saranax left the engine room. Eli stood among the machinery, his hands on the drive housing, and he did not move for a long time. Kael'thira found him there. She had come to bring him food, a reversal that had happened gradually over the days on the Iron Veil, her body recovering enough to begin thinking about someone other than herself, her attention expanding beyond the radius of her own survival to include the survival of the boy who had expanded hers. He was not crying. His face was dry, but his hands on the drive housing were white-knuckled, and the stillness of him was the wrong kind of still, not peaceful, compressed. Pressure without outlet. She set the food down on a work surface, sat on the floor near the drive housing, did not speak. Eli slid down the housing until he was sitting on the floor too. Their shoulders were close, not touching. The space between them was the width of a decision neither of them had made yet. "I dream about her," he said. "My mom. I dream that I'm back in a salvage ship, and she's in the cockpit, and She's singing that song she always sings when she's recalibrating the NAV system. This old Earth song. And I wake up and I'm in the Valkyrie and it's quiet and I have to remember all over again. He said it the way Kael'thira had told him about the paper. Flat. Grooved. A thing so often felt that the feeling had worn smooth. She said nothing. She sat in his quiet and held it the way he had held hers, and the nothing between them was the loudest conversation she had ever participated in. After a while, he ate the food she had brought. After a while longer, they went to the cargo bay and sat among the bioluminescent organisms whose aurora patterns had intensified with proper care, and the shifting light played across their faces, scales and skin, gold eyes and dark eyes, and they talked about what came next. Meridian Station was a trade hub at the intersection of 4 fringe routes. It had a population of 8,000 permanent residents and a rotating population of twice that in traders, mechanics, scientists, drifters, and people whose professions resisted easy categorization. It had markets and repair docks and information brokers and a communication relay strong enough to reach the inner territories of any major species domain, including the Draconari Ember territories. I need to contact the University of the Ember Reaches, Kael'thira said. My academic allies, the ones who publish my papers. If any of them survive my father's retribution, they will be critical to what comes next. And what comes next? Exposure. My exile was classified as voluntary departure. I have no doubt that the official record states I chose to leave. If I surface alive with evidence of what was done to me, the narrative collapses. My father's authority depends on the appearance of legitimate governance. An attempted murder of his own daughter, even disguised as exile, would destabilize the court. Would it be enough to change things? The caste system, the flame purity stuff? No, not alone. But it would create a fracture. Fractures can be widened. Eli looked at her. The steady light. You've been planning this. I have been eating paper for 11 months. I have had significant time to plan. He laughed. The sound of it bounced off the cargo bay walls, and the bioluminescent organisms pulsed in response, their light cycling faster, as though laughter was a frequency they recognized. Okay, he said. So here's what I'm thinking. Meridian Station has information brokers who can get messages into secure networks. We contact your university people. We build a case. We find allies in the fringe who have reasons to challenge Draconari expansion, and there are plenty because your species has been taking territory for centuries and not everybody's okay with it. You are proposing a coalition. I'm proposing that we stop being two lost people and start being two dangerous people. Kael'thira looked at him. This boy, this human boy who had offered her cookies on a dead station and called her chaos beautiful and sat in her silences and never once asked her to be less than what she was. He was 17. He was a thief. He had no resources, no army, no political standing. He had a stolen shuttle and a broken mother and a grin that could power a small star. She had spent her life in a palace surrounded by beings of immense power who had used that power to diminish her. And here, in a freighter's cargo bay lit by stolen marine organisms, a human boy with nothing was offering to help her burn it all down. You understand what you are proposing, she said. Challenging the Ember Throne is not an academic exercise. My father commands a fleet. He commands fire. And you command fire that changes color based on how you feel. You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like adaptation. That sounds like evolution. Your father's white flame is static. Yours responds to the world. That's not a defect. That's what comes next. The words landed somewhere deep, below the open compartment, below the place where she kept her mother, down in the bedrock of her, where the fundamental architecture of who she was had been warped by 14 years of being told she was broken. What comes next? She breathed fire. Not accidentally this time. She chose it, drew from her recovering reserves, and pushed flame through her glands and out, and it came in a stream of color that was nothing like the controlled white plasma of her father's line. It was iridescent, shifting a ribbon of blue-green gold-violet that curled through the air of the cargo bay and made the marine organisms go wild, their bioluminescence exploding into full-spectrum response. the entire bay becoming a cathedral of living light. Eli sat in the middle of it, his face lit by dragon fire and alien aurora, his dark eyes reflecting colors that had no name in any language Kale Thyra spoke. Beautiful, he said. The same word, the same wonder, the same boy. The fire faded. The organisms settled into a slower pulse. The bay returned to its normal amber lighting, but the scorch marks on the ceiling remained, iridescent, shifting faintly even as they cooled, as though the fire had left a permanent signature in the metal. It had. Kael'thira's fire always did. Her father had ordered every surface she scorched to be replaced, erased. Her mark was not permitted to persist. These marks would persist. Sarnax would see them, and her bioluminescence would do something complicated